competition started right when I started back in 92,
Oh,
first
okay.
days at Rodney's Oyster House. I started basically September, and in the beginning of September, 2 weeks into my first shift, like the second week, they go, oh, there's this oyster festival we're running called the Ontario Oyster Festival. It was the early onset of it. They did it at another, it was a promotion at another restaurant called Movenpick, where they would do Oyster Week, and then they wanted to do something fun. And so, yeah, we'll do this shucking contest thing. So the cats threw, I go, I'm not shucking. I just barely picked up a knife as it is. They go, no, you're in. Everybody goes in. So, okay, whatever. I just didn't want to come last or whatever. I just didn't want to cut my hand off.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't cut my hand off, and I actually didn't come in last. I came in 13th out of 14 people. 14 did disqualify, but, you know, didn't matter at that point. I was like, yes,
Right.
I beat Jamie. And
Yeah.
so Jamie's this big, you know, huge fella who would shuck oysters, and that was my first foray into it. And then that was in September, and then the next season in the summertime, there was a road trip to Prince Edward Island to the Canadian Championships. And I'm like, so everybody got to go. I went on this road trip, got to Tyne Valley, and Murph, who was the guy who really trained me the most at Rodney's Oyster House, Murph won it that year. It was the first year a Toronto person was going to go to the Worlds. And so I thought, this is wild. You work at a restaurant, you goof around, you have oysters, and you do this contest thing. And if you do well at the contest, you get a free trip to Prince Edward Island. If you do well at that, you get a free trip to Ireland. That's something to do. So that's where it sort of came together. And I didn't start getting good until about 3 years into it, because really I didn't get the time on the knife. You had to graduate. You had to earn your chops to graduate in that house.
Mm-hmm.
And it was tough. They're larger than life characters, and they would beat you around, and, you know, it was fun, but you had to be good at what you're doing. You had to make a good looking oyster first, before you get quick. And then I started changing things up in the technique, because coming from a kinesiology background, so sports sciences, I was watching how a lot of the guys would shuck oysters. They would pick up the oyster, put it down, shuck it, pick it up or with one hand, and their knife hand would do nothing. They'd pick it up with the oyster hand, pick it up, place it, shuck it, and this hand stays completely doing nothing. So I go, this hand has to do something. So I went, picked it up, placed it, held it, shuck it, put it. So now both hands are doing something. And so I split the hands up and started working on a technique like that. And that's where I got very, very fast. And then I worked on the handle. As you all know, that I have this weird looking handle type of thing, right? This whole thing.
Nice.
But I was working on that. I worked on that because the oyster knife, regular oyster knife, is a little wooden thing, and it's lovely and gorgeous, but it would fit about 2/3 of the hand, not 100% of the hand. So I was thinking of what my kinesiology, biomechanics, and ergodynamics classes were talking to me in my head, saying that the best effective tool fits more of the body part that uses it, whether it's I was thinking of an injection molded ski boot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, back in the 90s, and ski boots back then were injection molded, and they would fit and you would get better a kinetic response to the ski through a perfectly molded ski boot. So I wanted a perfectly molded knife handle. So I said, how am I going to get a handle molded to my hand? And this is sort of where I came up with this stuff here. And it's an epoxy putty. So it's plumber's putty. You go to the hardware store, you get a 2-part epoxy putty, you smush it all together. You get a blade that you like, you jam it into your hand, and it dries in your hand. It heats up a lot. It gets very, very hot. The first one I did without a surgical glove, big mistake.
Wow.
Second one, I did one surgical glove. The third one I did double glove, because it actually heats up so much that it scalded my hand. And I'm like, that's not good. So double glove was very good in the temperature range, because it takes about 15 minutes for it to set. And I got about 40 tries before I got to this angle. You can see that this one effectively fits my hand. It's very, very tight.
Mm-hmm.
And so it fits beautifully. And each time I made it, it sort of made this shape into a pistol grip. And what I figured, it works like a lever in the end. If you've got 2 axis points, you've got an axis here and an axis there. That's 135 degrees between tip and tail. It becomes a lever. So I can open up an oyster with like 3 fingers of force. When you have a lever, it reduces the amount of force that's required to do what you're doing, prying open, lifting things, whatever. So the leverage that I get out of this handle allows me to literally torque open any oyster with 3 fingers of force, which is very little. It reduces it by that much. So you can, but using it in the hand, the beautiful thing in the handle as well, it did not slip. So it didn't slip. I got this oyster knife that would be custom fit to myself. So I started at Rodney's, is where I was building these things by hand and and tweaking. I would take a Dexter Russell S122 blade, hack it out of the plastic handle, insert it into this, and then I would hone it down to where I wanted to. The knife handle, the original knife, this is what I call the original on the SHUCKDADDY thing. It has a certain length of blade, about 3.5 inches. People are like, why that length? I go, well, when I was carving a blade, I don't know if you can see, there's a scar here. Right here. Probably you can't see it that well, right? So there's a scar here. When I'm honing a blade, it goes from the hinge to there. That's as I'm cutting blades without getting a tape measure, I'm like, yep, that's good. And so that was the length. And so when everything is done because of there's like 14 really good scars on this hand. Then I got the glove and did all that type of stuff. But later on, the only reason I got into this, into manufactured stuff, was again at Starfish. After winning the world championships, I'm still working with this. And one of the owners of Swissmar, who's a knife company, came in and was like, what is this? So I told him the story. And they go, this is great. And he was sitting with a friend of his, and he goes, well, I'm Daniel. I'm the president of Swissmar kitchen cutlery here in Toronto. I've actually heard of that company back then. And this is my buddy. He's the president of Victorinox Swiss Army. I'm like, heard of that one too. And so they go, would you like to put that knife into retail? I'm like, again, as opportunity goes, like, I got nothing better to do on a Friday night. Sure, let's do this.